A few months back, President Trump was bragging on himself rather incessantly about all the wars he solved, one of which was the one in the Middle East, where he claims that he solved the Iran and Israel war, the Israel and Hamas war. And now a lot of those things don't seem to be really over with. And then today, here on the 2nd of 2026, the second day of the year, he says if Iran, I think he means shoots there, shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded, ready to go. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. So what in the world is going on? What is our plan with Iran? What is the American strategy at large? Because this is kind of a new issue here. And we're going to try to figure out where this is going to go, along with a number of other issues there. And we have nobody better to try and assess some of this stuff today than Professor John Mearsheimer, international relations theorist and professor of political science at the University of Chicago. John, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Danny. Glad to be here, and Happy New Year to you and to Gary.
Same to you, and we appreciate that, and you're actually our first guest of the new year, so that's an honor for us to have you on as well, and we appreciate that. Let's just take a look at this issue here with President Trump, because I mean that's a pretty boisterous statement there. This is similar to some of the things he said before attacking in Nigeria not long ago, when he said that these attacks on Christians don't stop, he was going to take action, and then he did lob some missiles at least into a field. I don't know if it actually accomplished anything, but he did do something after that. Now, this is coming just a couple of days after he met with Bibi Netanyahu, who came to Mar-a-Lago and said this.
Now I hear that Iran is trying to build up again, and if they are, we're going to have to knock them down. We'll knock them down. We'll knock the hell out of them, but hopefully that's not happening. I heard Iran wants to make a deal. If they want to make a deal, that's much smarter. They could have made a deal the last time before we went through, a big attack on them. And they decided not to make the deal. They wish they made that deal. So I think, again, they should make a deal. They want to make a deal, but sometimes that doesn't happen.
We're going to knock them down, John. We're just going to knock them down again, like it's just some kid knocking some building blocks over. What do you make of that?
Well, when it comes to Iran, the first thing you have to understand is that the Israelis and the Israel lobby in the United States basically own Trump. And whatever they want to do, Trump has to go along. But at the same time, Trump's basic modus operandi is to talk tough, but use a little stick. He uses military force a lot, but it has no real effect. And he is purposely avoiding getting us dragged into another forever war. And if you look back to when we attacked Iran on June 22nd of last year, that's June 22nd, 2025, it was basically a one-off. One day we attacked, we declared that we had won a decisive victory and said that's the end of the story. So you see that Trump is willing to use military force against Iran, but he's very wary of getting dragged into a fight. And you see this in all sorts of other instances as well. You just described what he did in Nigeria. He talked tough on Nigeria, but in the end, he did hardly anything, lobbed a few missiles into a field. Now, he is saying with regard to Iran today in his post that if they kill any protesters, we're going to slam them. But the fact is, they've already killed 7 protesters. So what is he going to do about that? And what if they kill 2 more tomorrow? What is he going to do about that? Is he going to get us involved in a serious war? No, he may lob a few missiles at them, but nothing more than that. So I think he has to placate Prime Minister Netanyahu. He has to tell Netanyahu what Netanyahu and Netanyahu's supporters want to hear. Because again, they basically own Trump. He's not an America first president. He's an Israel first president. But at the same time, he doesn't want to get us involved in a big war. So these, in a very important way, are empty words.
So now, I mean, I think you can certainly make the case that he's trying to placate Netanyahu. But I mean, Netanyahu, you can placate the American public and certainly some of the MAGA by claiming to be tough and then showing some of these like Nigeria. Yeah, we're defending the Christians, whatever, even though when you look on the ground, it really didn't do anything. According to some reports, it literally killed no one, blew up nothing, but hit a field. So it certainly didn't deter anybody from anything, but it looks good. And few people actually bother to find out whether it hit anything or not. It just looks like he's tough. That works for them. But with Netanyahu, this kind of stuff, just lobbing a few missiles in there, which doesn't cause any change of the conditions, doesn't seem like that would be enough. Would Netanyahu be placated by that?
No, there's no question that Netanyahu will go to great lengths to get Trump to unleash the dogs, to really go after Iran big time. And when he recently visited the White House, Netanyahu, that is, Trump came out and made it clear that he's not only concerned about Iran rebuilding its nuclear capabilities, but now he's saying that Iran cannot rebuild its ballistic missile capabilities or increase its ballistic missile capabilities. And then again today, he's saying that if the Iranian government shoots any of the protesters, that we will use force against them. So Trump, at least rhetorically, is upping the ante. He's now got 3 criteria against which we might get involved in shooting against Iran.
And let's take a look at that from your international relations theorist hat. And it's almost pointless to even ask this, but I feel obligated to do it. Is there any international authority that should Trump use force to make good on this claim right here about the killing peaceful protesters, that he is just or authorized to use lethal force against the regime of Iran?
No. I mean, but Trump doesn't pay attention to international law or international norms. He just does what he sees fit. You want to remember that in the Caribbean, he has instructed the U.S. military to attack these boats that we don't even know who's on the boats and what they're doing. And the aim is to kill everybody. And it appears that we've killed over 100 people on boats in the Caribbean, which is, in my opinion, a violation of international law. But again, Trump doesn't care.
Well, and that's got some problems of its own, and I want to look at some of those. We can talk about the moral issues, which probably is enough right there. But before that, even I want to look at some of the policy implications and the ramifications for the interest of America. Now, he mentioned in that soundbite a second ago that he said Iran should make a deal. They didn't make a deal last time, he says, and I bet they wish they had of, and now maybe they still can't. That's his public position anyway. But I want to go back here. This is a report on the 16th of June of last year, to where it said that the United States was in the process of working out some negotiations with the Iranians. Gary, if you can put that headline up there, that full screen, the one from 16th. Thank you. It says the Trump team proposes Iran talks this week on a nuclear deal and a ceasefire. So this was the process we were ongoing. 16th of June. Then on the 20th of June, Trump gave an impromptu press conference in front of an airplane. So 4 days later, and before this meeting had taken place but was in the process, he said this.
Does Iran have 2 weeks, or could you strike before that? Are you essentially giving them a 2-week timeline?
I'm giving them a period of time. We're going to see what that period of time is, but I'm giving them a period of time. And I would say 2 weeks would be the maximum.
So I'm giving them a period of time. Well, there was no truth to that. The plans were already engaged at that point. And I think on the 21st in the local time there, or maybe it was in here time, 1 day later or about a day and a half later, we struck. So it looked like we were trying to negotiate with Iran in good faith on the 16th. And we had negotiations going back and forth. Trump said we had 2 weeks on the one hand, and then all of a sudden planes were dropping bombs after that. What does that do to our credibility and his desire now to say that I want Iran to negotiate?
Well, it sends a very clear signal to all of our adversaries that you can't trust the United States. And the Russians have figured this out themselves. The Iranians know it, of course, and the North Koreans know it, and the Chinese know it. You can't trust anything that the United States says. And if you need a more glaring example than this one, it would be hard to find.
Well, and there was one other glaring example, and that was on the 9th of September when we were negotiating with Hamas and they were meeting with our ally Qatar. And then here comes the Israelis and try to assassinate the negotiators and try to kill them, which obviously is the worst thing you can possibly do. And so you see all these. And of course, this is, going back to 2018 when Trump withdrew unilaterally from the JCPOA that had been negotiated. And he always claimed he was going to negotiate a better deal, never did. So it just looks like we are literally all over the map and we don't even have any interest in any kind of negotiation. So in light of this, and we're going to look at the Russia-Ukraine war in just a second, but I mean, just kind of take a preview there across the board. What is going to be the relationship or the implications when you're talking about heads of state or negotiating teams in places like Russia?
Well, the fact is you just can't trust the word of any American leader at this point. It was true of Biden as well as it is of Trump, although Trump is a more glaring case. But I don't know what else to say. You just can't trust the United States. And by the way, this gets back to the whole subject of NATO expansion. The great mistake that the Soviets made at the end of the Cold War was not to get in writing, not to get in some legal document that they could point to later on that said NATO wouldn't expand. What the Soviets depended on was America's word. And we, of course, said we would not expand NATO. And then the Clinton administration came along and it expanded NATO. And following in the wake of the Clinton administration, the Bush administration decided to expand NATO into Ukraine and Georgia. And the Russians learned that you have to get it in writing. And even then, it doesn't mean that much because the United States can violate a written agreement. A bit more difficult to violate a written agreement than a verbal agreement, but you can still violate a written agreement. But this is why the Russians today want everything written down. They want legal agreements. They're not going to take Trump's word for it. And given what you have just shown, they have every reason not to trust the Americans.
It's ironic. You talk about what the Russians are doing. Volodymyr Zelensky is doing the same kind of thing in that he is saying he wants security guarantees, but not just something on a piece of paper. He wants something that goes through the United States Congress because he himself doesn't trust anything that the U.S. says. And he's going back to the alleged problems with the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, which I don't know that he's going to actually get anything better than that anyway, or even as good as that. But that does show you, though, that even our friends are saying, yeah, I don't trust what you say. I want something in writing. So that by itself is also a problem. We're about to see why that is in a second. I do want to show you one other thing that goes along with that. This is what the world is seeing, and I kind of wonder what your thoughts are on how this is landing everywhere, because we had Pete Hegseth tweeted out earlier today on an X post, actually. He says it's called peace through strength. After disastrous years of Joe Biden, where America was woke, weak, and in a retreat, he loves to use those alliteration kind of things, President Trump and the Department of War are reestablishing deterrence. We will never back down. He said that in light of a Military Times article, which you see here on the screen. And this thing's called A Year of Strikes, U.S. Military Operations Surge Under Trump. When you start rolling through this, and you can see in the article, it chronicles everything that all these different uses of force that we've had throughout the first year of the Trump administration here. And Gary, if you can just kind of roll through some of that. I mean, you see there's the Somalia on February 1st and counting. There's Iraq. We launched some, then into Yemen again, specifically into Yemen, Iran, as we talked about a second ago, Nigeria, the Caribbean Sea, all those ones you just mentioned. That's a lot of use of force. I don't know of any other country on the planet that actually has done anything close to this. And my question to you is this really demonstrations of peace through strength, or is it undermining peace?
Well, I don't think that this is restoring our deterrence in any meaningful way. I mean, most of these operations were pinpricks or just not successful at all. Just think about the Venezuela case. We've had a giant armada in the Caribbean since August. And we've not used military force in any meaningful way in the Caribbean, despite having all this firepower down there. And it's very clear that Trump wants regime change in Venezuela. And one of the principal reasons he put that armada down there was to get regime change. But he has not used that armada, and there's no evidence that he's going to use it anytime soon, because it's almost impossible to figure out what the strategy is that he could employ to achieve his desired end. So what we've ended up doing is maybe bombing this one dock. Nobody's sure whether we really bombed it. And then we spend a lot of time blowing these boats out of the water in the Caribbean. Is that restoring deterrence? I doubt it. And then we talked about what happened in Nigeria. This is a pinprick at best. The same thing is true with the attacks on Iraq and on Syria. With regard to Iran, that is the one, I would say, major use of force. It was a one-day attack. Trump declared victory, but we're now talking about attacking Iran again because apparently we didn't achieve victory, and the Iranians are in a position where they can rebuild their nuclear capability, rebuild their lost or replace their lost ballistic missiles, and so forth and so on. So it's not clear we've deterred Iran in any meaningful way.
Well, and it can actually be argued that it's had the opposite effect on Iran. Instead of making them capitulate and want to come to negotiations, according to what their President Pezeshkian said just a few days ago, that they consider themselves almost at war with the West, and because they feel like they're being warred against by them. So they're building up their armada of missiles and missile defense capabilities. And they claim that they have now restored everything that they lost in June, and in fact have gone further beyond that, which would not be a good thing for Israel. So if they want to try to do something here, and now that their offensive missile capacity has been dispersed throughout the country, as some experts have recently told us, that would mean that if you try something new, you may have an even worse outcome. How do you see that?
Well, Danny, just a second here. We've just talked about these 7 minor uses of force. Let's talk about what Trump has done with regard to China, with regard to Russia, and with regard to the Middle East in terms of restoring deterrence, showing how tough the United States is. When Trump came into office, he decided he was going to get tough with the Chinese. And he started by putting very high tariffs on the Chinese. He was forced to back down. He has not been able to play tough with the Chinese. The Chinese have outmaneuvered him in 2025. With regard to the Russians, he said that he was going to shut that war down as soon as he came into office. Did he shut it down? No. What's happening there? We are on the losing side. That doesn't improve deterrence in any meaningful way. So if you look at the Chinese situation and the Russian situation, doesn't look like we've done very well. And going to the Middle East, right? It's quite clear, as I said before, that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis own Trump. He has hardly any maneuver room. This notion that he's created peace in Gaza is laughable. There's no ceasefire, at least from the Israeli perspective. And with regard to Iran, as we've just talked about, we've not solved the Iran problem. We're talking about going back against Iran. So in what sense has Trump been successful on the foreign policy front? Oh, and by the way, he's wrecked relations with India. We had improved relations with India over the past 25 years, but because of the administration's foolish policies, we've poisoned relations with the Modi government. This is a huge blunder. So if you look at the overall record of Trump's foreign policy in 2025, it's hardly impressive at all.
And I guess one of the rare places of success that you can see, depending on your definition of success, is in the Middle East. With lots of money, he's gotten at least pledges of investment in American business, and apparently lots for his family members. So that seems to have worked out pretty well, but not so much for the United States or peace in the general area. You mentioned where how some of this has landed on Russia. Let's go ahead and shift over to that because here there was this meeting recently in Mar-a-Lago between Zelensky and Trump. And they were supposed to be, first of all, they were coming to talk about this 28-point peace plan that the U.S. and Witkoff had come up with, apparently in coordination with the Russians, trying to find something that they could agree with. The Russians said that's a good basis to start from, but there's a bunch of stuff in that 28-point plan that we don't like. Well, there was even more things that the Ukraine side didn't like. So they changed it from 28 to 20. And then a lot of those contained a lot of poison pills for the Russians, and then also didn't include other things that really need to be in there. The day before the meeting with Zelensky in Mar-a-Lago, President Putin came out and said, and very publicly, that there would be no compromise whatsoever on the Donbass issue. He says, my interest is now about zero, he said, in worrying about whether there's going to be a negotiation or not. Either they abide by our terms, which we laid out on the 14th of June, 2024, or we'll take it by force. And then we had Zelensky's meeting, and in the afternoon of his meeting, he went on Fox News and said this about territory.
They're tired. Are they ready for a deal?
People want peace. 87% support peace. At the same time, 85% against to withdraw from East, from the Donbass. It's meant that everybody wants peace, but just peace.
Yeah, of course, just peace depends on very much on your position and where you're standing. Gary, if you could put that full screen up of the Donbass. This also includes Zaporizhia and Kherson, but I want to focus in on the Donbass area, because that's one of the things Zelensky specifically said. And you see that dotted line there represents the outlines of the Donbass, and you see that the green area is where Ukraine currently controls. So for the Russia to say that our terms have been met, you have to withdraw from all that to include Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka. All of those are fortress cities where it's very, very difficult to take militarily. So their position is, and their claim is, which has some merit, if we just unilaterally withdraw from that, then we've got nothing beyond that. And if Russia decided to go back with the offensive, then it would be much, much harder for us to leave. So we can't withdraw from there. What do you say?
Well, what the Russians are going to do is take back all of Donetsk. And if there's no agreement, they're going to take back additional territory besides the 4 oblasts that they've already annexed, plus Crimea. This is the great danger that the Ukrainians face. The Ukrainians are losing, and they're losing territory, and they're losing in the war of attrition in terms of the ratio of casualties on each side. So it's in Ukraine's interest to cut a deal now and accept the fact that they're going to lose all of Donetsk and all of the Donbass and just pull out. But they're unwilling to do that. I don't know what else to say.
And one of the comments that was made by a colleague of mine who recently went to Kiev and met with a bunch of senior elites and government officials as well. And the claim came back that no one would say out loud, but that their view is that Zelensky can't politically make that move, the one that makes sense that you talked about, because then he would be undone politically. So they say it's actually easier for him to lose that territory militarily, and then maybe sometime in 26 to say, okay, now then we'll have to, because now then they've taken this territory, they prove that they can, so now we can make the deal. What do you say to that claim?
Well, I think that's a plausible argument for what he's doing. Who knows for sure? But all the evidence is that the Ukrainians are unwilling to give up this territory voluntarily. I just don't know what else to say. And as you and I have said on this show many times, this war is going to be settled on the battlefield. All these negotiations are kabuki theater. It's hard to take this stuff seriously. I mean, I force myself to read the newspaper because I know I'm going to come on your show and have to talk about this. Really, is this serious? I mean, if you look at the 20-point plan that the Ukrainians have come up with, and you look at the 28-point plan that the Trump administration has come up with, the Russians are not going to accept either one of them. On all of the principal issues that the Russians really care about, we, the United States, have given virtually nothing to the Russians, and the Ukrainians have certainly given nothing to the Russians. So the Ukrainians and the Americans having negotiations about the 20-point plan versus the 28-point plan is all absurd. It's kabuki theater. And what's going on here, to be honest, is you have two wars taking place. You have a public relations war and you have a real war. And this is all part of the public relations war. But it's not serious. The idea that the Russians are going to agree to this 20-point plan or 28-point plan is simply out of the question.
So I think I have some memory that you made some of these similar comments this past August of last year when we had the meeting between the heads of state, between Trump and Putin in Anchorage, Alaska. And, you know, the big pomp and circumstances, the red carpet, the flyover and all this. And Trump came out of that saying, yeah, I think we're going to have a bilateral meeting soon, and then maybe a trilateral meeting by the end of August. And we can, and you at the time said, but based on what? Because none of the fundamentals that have been talked about publicly have changed any on either side. And literally nothing came of that. And now it looks like, and you're in the same place, that this one is just the next iteration of the kabuki theater. So the question is going to be, what now? If what you suggest turns out to be the case, that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians move from their position, then that's only going to leave more fighting. So where does it go?
Just very quickly, before I answer that question, I have to laugh when I hear that the Americans want to give the Ukrainians a 15-year security guarantee, but the Ukrainians want a 50-year security guarantee. Don't they both understand that the Russians will not accept any kind of American security guarantee to Ukraine? Don't they understand that this war is principally about the whole subject of Ukraine getting an Article 5 security guarantee from NATO? It's all just sort of ludicrous. You really wonder what's going on. Now, you ask, where is it all headed? As you and I have said many times, this one is going to be settled on the battlefield. The Russians understand that. They effectively say that all the time. The Russians are not fooled by any of this. And by the way, if you go back to our earlier discussion when we discussed the whole issue of whether you can trust Trump or not, do you really think the Russians trust Trump? They don't trust Trump. They understand that this kabuki theater is very important for impressing other countries around the world, that the Russians are not the principal obstacle to peace here. They also understand that there's no point in angering Trump. You want to have good relations with Trump for a variety of reasons, but the Russians are surely sophisticated enough at this point in time to understand this whole negotiation process is a dead end. It's just going to lead nowhere. And there is no evidence that it has led anywhere since it started after Trump came into the White House. If you look at where we are today on January 2nd, 2026, I ask you, are we any better off than we were in the first weeks or first months after Trump moved into the White House? Have we made serious progress? The answer is no. If I'm wrong, Danny, I would like you to point out to me what is the one issue regarding these negotiations where we have actually made some significant progress.
Well, obviously, I can't provide any because there isn't any. The Ukraine side is literally all over the map. They keep claiming what they're going to do and telling people what they're not going to do, whereas the Russians have not moved from where they were on Inauguration Day in January of last year. They're still there today. They keep referring to that June 2024 time repeatedly, and those terms: demilitarization, denazification, neutrality status, no NATO, and rights for the Russian people. And of course the territorial of all the administrative borders. They've never said anything different, and they're saying it still today. So based on that, you can say there has been no progress at all. It hasn't gotten any worse, but now it seems like it might be. And I wonder how you interpret some of Putin's comments here recently in the last week or so, where he made that statement in uniform that my interest is about zero of even worrying about whether Ukraine's going to withdraw from anything. They either agree to our terms or it's going to be forced, because that sounded a little more emphatic to me than his previous statements.
Well, I think it's quite clear that Putin, from time to time, shows that he's angry about this whole negotiating process. He, of course, spends endless hours talking to Witkoff and Kushner and even talking to Trump, and it really seems to lead nowhere. I would imagine that the Russians are explaining to these Americans what their red lines are, what their principal demands are, and that they are constantly amazed that they can't seem to penetrate the skulls of these American leaders who they're talking to, because there's no evidence that President Trump or Steve Witkoff or Jared Kushner understand what those June 14 demands were. It's really quite remarkable. So I think Putin, not surprisingly, gets angry from time to time and says that this will be settled on the battlefield. Look, Danny, the one thing we haven't talked about here, which is very important and I think informs Putin's thinking, is that the burden for supporting Ukraine has been shifted off the shoulders of the Americans and onto the shoulders of the Europeans. This is one thing that Trump has done. Trump wants to wash his hands as much as possible. He can't do it completely, but he wants to wash his hands of the Ukraine conflict as much as possible. And he wants the Europeans to be responsible for supporting Ukraine. And very importantly, he wants them to provide the financial wherewithal to keep Ukraine afloat. And the problem is that the Europeans can't do that. As you remember, not long ago, they were talking about stealing all those Russian frozen assets. And it looked like they were going to be able to get away with that. And that would provide robust funding for Ukraine for 2 years. But ultimately, they failed. They couldn't get a consensus in Europe to do that.
Well, and that's exactly what I was about to ask you anyway. So this is a perfect opportunity for that. We can discuss and have many times what it will look like on the battlefield going here forward if the diplomatic areas can maintain unresolved and we don't accommodate any of the Russian requirements here from a position of strength. So it's going to continue moving to the west. We can talk about how fast or slow. But let me ask you, it's going to, whether it's fast or slow, we know where it's going to end. You've said it many times, and I don't see any evidence to contradict you. What does that mean for Europe? Because since they didn't steal the funds here, then the only thing they had left was to print it and to borrow it at their expense to give to Ukraine. And they're claiming that it's a loan in the sense that Russia's reparations eventually will repay it, but not them. So it's free money to Zelensky. It's not free money to the Europeans. And so they have borrowed this money. They have to pay for it in some way. What is this going to do economically to the $45 billion this year and the $45 billion next year?
Well, the fact is that this war has been a disaster for Europe from an economic and a political point of view. But it's quite clear that the war has done significant damage to the German economy. The German economy was very heavily dependent on energy because of its manufacturing base. And before the war started, the Germans basically eliminated their nuclear power infrastructure, and they therefore relied very heavily on oil and gas from Russia. But then when the war broke out, they basically abandoned, for the most part, their reliance on oil and gas, cheap oil and gas from Russia. So this is a real critical 1-2 punch blow to the German economy. And the German economy faces all sorts of other problems, including competition from China with regard to automobiles and assorted other manufactured goods. And furthermore, a lot of the infrastructure in Germany is outdated. So the German economy, by virtually all accounts, is in real trouble. And that is in good part, not completely, but in good part because of the war. And you want to remember the German economy is what really fuels the European economies. I mean, that German economy has to roar along for the rest of Europe to do well economically. And if you look forward, that's not the case at all. So to go back to your point about the loans, the trouble with these loans is going to be superimposed on that existing trouble that I just described. So Europe looks like it's in real trouble moving forward from an economic point of view. And then there are all the political differences that are now popping up in Europe. It's quite clear that the Hungarians, the Slovakians, and the Czechs are all at odds with a lot of what the other countries are willing to do vis-a-vis Russia. And furthermore, you see all sorts of evidence that the Germans and the French are at each other's throats, and that Merz believes that Macron has undermined him on a critical issue involving paying for Ukraine's survival. So there's just a lot of trouble in the works here. And then at some point, the war is going to be lost. And this is going to be a real hammer blow to NATO. People are going to point fingers, and you're going to point fingers across the Atlantic Ocean as well. I mean, here we are talking just about Europe, but you don't want to talk just about Europe. You want to talk about transatlantic relations as well. And transatlantic relations are at an all-time low, as you and I both know, and they're likely to only get worse once the war in Ukraine is lost. So I think that from Putin's point of view, just watching all this, what you want to do is just bide your time and let Europe get further and further into the quagmire, let transatlantic relations get worse and worse, and then count on the situation improving on the battlefield for you, the Russians. And eventually you'll win. It may take a bit more time than people like you and I anticipated, but ultimately you'll prevail.
Yeah. Hard to argue with that. And that seems reasonable to presume that is his actual strategy, because unlike us, the Russians have a strategy. We'll see how that plays out. In the remainder of the time here, I want to shift over to another topic that I know you spend a lot of time with, and that is China-Taiwan. We haven't talked about it that much here, but here in the last, I guess, period of time, there's been a lot of issues that have happened, and it seems to be roiling a little bit more than it had. And issues like the United States just authorized an $11 billion arms package for Taiwan, which is the biggest single package that we've done I think ever. You've had Li Ching-te, the president of Taiwan, that was newly elected last year, is a lot more pro-democratic in his rhetoric than a lot of his predecessors, and certainly more that the Chinese want. And then here they just had this big Chinese drill, I think the third large scale, where they basically rehearsed a blockade of the island, etc. Where is this thing going, and are you worried about it?
Well, I'm very worried about it. I mean, we don't pay much attention to it because our mind is focused on the Middle East and on Ukraine. And that's reflected in the program today. We started in the Middle East, then we went to Russia, and finally we're going to China. And as you point out, we've not talked that much about China. But the potential for trouble in East Asia between the United States and China and its neighbors is enormous. And what you see going on vis-a-vis Taiwan is very worrying. It's one of the three big flashpoints out there, the other two being the South China Sea and the East China Sea. And two things have recently happened that greatly anger the Chinese. The first is that the Japanese prime minister said in early December of last year, that's December 2025, that if China were to invade Taiwan, Japan would see that in all likelihood as a threat to its survival. I think that was interpreted by the Chinese quite correctly as meaning that Japan would come to the defense of Taiwan. And this, of course, enraged the Chinese. Because the Chinese believe that Taiwan is a domestic political issue for Beijing, and it's none of Japan's business. Plus, you have the history of what happened in the past, especially in World War II, in terms of Sino. Japanese relations. So this was one big incident. And then the other was, as you pointed out, the United States gave $11.1 billion in military assistance to Taiwan, which is all designed to help Taiwan defend itself against an attack from China. So you have this situation where the Chinese desperately want to take Taiwan back. They think that it's sacred territory that belongs to them. And they also surely understand that it has great strategic value for them. And we, on the other hand, and here I'm talking not just about the United States, but the Japanese as well, we both understand that we have a deep-seated strategic interest in keeping Taiwan on our side of the ledger. And the end result is you have this head-to-head face-off between the United States and Japan on one side and China on the other side over Taiwan. And how this plays out over time is very hard to say, but you can tell all sorts of plausible stories about how you get a war over Taiwan. And you could do a similar thing with regard to the South China Sea and the East China Sea. And by the way, you can do a similar thing with regard to the India-China border up in the Himalaya Mountains. There have been a spate of articles that have come out to talk about the military buildup on the Indian side and on the Chinese side of the line of control up there. And of course, the potential for a real war is there for sure. So East Asia is a dangerous area, much the way the Middle East is and the way Ukraine is.
And what are your concerns about diplomacy and what's the word I'm looking for? Sovereignty. For example, there are those who say, well, we obviously see there are those who say that basically Taiwan is independent, so there's no point in even messing around the state. We might as well just call out what it is. But then there's others that say, well, listen, in the realistic terms of things, you have to look at this the way what really makes sense. Is Taiwan helped by going down that path and saying they're independent? If that spawns a war that would be catastrophic and destructive, and I don't want to go into too much detail here, but my assessment is that there is no prospect, even if you succeeded in stopping China from completely capturing Taiwan. I doubt we could, but even if your so-called best case scenario, you now have this situation to where you almost have permanent conflict because China will never tolerate a permanent American military presence on Taiwan. So why would you even want to go down that path when you can, as the United States especially, privately tell the leaders of Taiwan, we will never go to war for you. So you need to understand that. And so you need to take whatever bilateral relations you need with China to make sure that they don't attack you. And if you go too far, you're going to be on your own, which would seem to preclude a war. Because I think the status quo can go on without any war as long as Taiwan doesn't move anymore in that direction. What do you say to that?
I think there is absolutely no question that we want to do everything we can to avoid a war over Taiwan, as well as over the South China Sea and the East China Sea. We do not want to get into a war with China. I want to make that very clear. But I also believe at the same time, we have a deep-seated interest in containing China and not allowing it to conquer Taiwan. So we have to walk a very fine line here. Now, I think it's clear that if Taiwan were to declare its independence, or we, the United States, was to say that Taiwan is a sovereign state, that this would lead to military action by China. The Chinese have made this clear over time. So we have historically leaned very heavily on the Taiwanese to never say that they are independent. And I think if they were moving in that direction, we would come down on them like a ton of bricks. Because again, we don't want a war over Taiwan. We're interested in containing China or deterring China, but not provoking a war. But the problem that you face is that if you make it clear, if you, the United States, and you, Japan, make it clear you're going to defend Taiwan, that gives the Taiwanese a lot of maneuver room to talk about declaring independence. So it's very important for the United States to understand that this is they're maneuvering in dangerous waters here, and they're going to have to go to especially great lengths to make sure that Taiwan does not do anything to provoke China and cause it to use military force. Let me make one final point about this, Danny. I've looked reasonably closely at how easy it would be for Taiwan to be conquered or captured by China. And I think that at this point in time and for the foreseeable future, as long as the United States and Japan come to the defense of Taiwan, it's almost impossible for China to conquer it at some reasonable cost. The fact is, it would involve a large-scale amphibious operation across the Taiwan Strait. And as you know well, amphibious operations are among the most difficult military operations possible. And with all those American submarines that would be in the water, and with all the drones and missiles that would be available on the Taiwanese/American/Japanese side, and given how vulnerable that assault force, that amphibious assault force would be coming across the Taiwan Strait, I think it'd be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for China now, given the balance of military power, to conquer Taiwan at some reasonable cost. So I think as long as we're smart politically, given the military balance of power, we can avoid a war over Taiwan in the foreseeable future.
But are you concerned, because certainly virtually every scenario simulation I've seen run on that, which for some reason I've seen only go out to 30 days, hasn't gone beyond that, that many of them say that we could prevent, as you suggest, an outright military conquest by China over Taiwan. But then that comes at profound cost to our side, aircraft carriers going to the bottom, jets getting knocked down, Marines getting killed, et cetera. We've had another guest on here before who used to be a diplomat to China that said even in that case, China would simply retool and go on, because they would not allow a situation to exist on Taiwan without going back again until they finally end up conquesting. So then we could get tied in and just sucked in to a long military extension that we can't afford in any capacity, whether it's personnel, planes and ships, et cetera, or money. So that seems like that would be a big time losing proposition to us with almost no upside. How do you see it?
Well, what I'm saying to you, and this is consistent with what you're saying, is that China can't win the war, and we can't win the war, at least in the short term. So we're in a situation where we're not really thinking about defeating China in a war over Taiwan. That's not going to happen. What we're going to try to do is stymie the Chinese, prevent China from taking Taiwan, and then it will turn into a long war. And the question is, where do you go from there? And who knows? And you want to remember, Danny, although you didn't say this, both sides do have nuclear weapons.
I was literally just about to say that, but yeah, that's just on the conventional level. That get a lot more worrisome after that.
Exactly. Both sides have nuclear weapons. And furthermore, you're fighting this war, not completely, but partially out in the water, where the possibility of using nuclear weapons is much greater than if you're fighting it on land. So the point here is that neither side would win a quick and decisive victory, and it would turn into a protracted war. And I think the threat of that outcome is a powerful force for deterrence. Right? That would be my argument here. And you just want to make it clear to the Chinese, and it's clear to the Americans as well, that you can't win. By the way, with regard to aircraft carriers, I don't think there'll be any aircraft carriers involved in the fight. I think they would be sunk to the bottom of the Jolly Roger very, very quickly. I think the weapons that really matter for the United States in this scenario are submarines.
Yeah.
I'd be building submarines and not aircraft carriers.
Yeah, I've been arguing that for a long time. What do you suggest there in terms of the sustainability? Because my bigger worry is, I'll just concede that maybe you're right, and nobody would win a decisive victory in the near term, however defined. But that long term, it seems to me, from what I've been able to read, and you know a lot more about this than I do, is that China has seen some of the lessons, not even just in the Russia-Ukraine war, but even before that, that they need to have a bigger industrial base where they can sustain all the key logistics required for a sustained combat, especially in missiles, missile defense, and other kinds of ammunition. And we absolutely don't. So we couldn't sustain one that they could. How do you see that?
I think this is our Achilles heel. The truth is, we have seen how important an industrial base is in a modern war. We thought after the Cold War ended that you didn't need a modern industrial base. We didn't think you had to worry about shipbuilding. We were wrong. And what's happened in Ukraine is decisive evidence that we were wrong. And as you correctly point out, this is a real problem for us in a fight with China in East Asia, because they have a formidable industrial base, much like the Russians do. And we have run down our industrial base. And as you well know, Danny, the Trump administration has been trying very hard to bring that industrial base or that manufacturing base back from the dead. But it's easier said than done. So I think one could make an argument that if we get into a long war, or let's put it this way, if there's no quick victory for either the Chinese and the United States in a fight over Taiwan, and it begins to evolve into a long war, we would be at a significant disadvantage. Yeah. And then that's when the question of nuclear weapons comes into play. Right. Because if the United States is desperate, if you're willing to go to war over Taiwan, you're effectively saying this is a vital strategic interest. You don't go to a war. You don't go to war with a country like China unless a vital strategic interest is involved. So you're in a situation that really matters, and you're losing, and you're the United States, or you're China. The question is, what do you do then?
Next, yeah.
And by the way, just to take this a step further, you want to understand that in a war over Taiwan, there will be all sorts of military assets on the Chinese mainland opposite of Taiwan that the United States will attack. So we will be attacking the Chinese homeland. It's also very important to understand that when you look at those assets, the nuclear command and control and the conventional command and control systems are intertwined in all sorts of ways. And a lot of weapons that can be used with conventional warheads can be used with nuclear warheads. And in a conflict that's sometimes, if not always, impossible to distinguish which weapons have nuclear warheads and which have conventional warheads. So all I'm saying is that in a war over Taiwan, you're not going to simply be fighting out in the water, in the Taiwan Strait. You're not going to be simply fighting over Taiwan itself. There's going to be major fighting inside of China. This is the Chinese homeland.
And so just let me ask, if that scenario were to come to pass and we were attacking conventionally targets on the Chinese mainland, what is the prospect that they would, whether through submarine or otherwise, hit American assets either on our homeland or in the region?
Oh, there's no question they're going to hit all of our assets in the region. And these will mainly be military bases in Japan, maybe South Korea as well. But if you're talking about a fight over Taiwan, there's no question that American military assets that are located in Japan, and this would include, an airbase like the one at Kadena on Okinawa, they'll definitely go after that. And the attacks will be massive. The Chinese have huge numbers of ballistic missiles. So there's no question on that front. Whether they go after the American homeland is another matter. But if you're the Chinese and you see the Americans attacking your homeland, the incentives for you to attack the American homeland are very great. And what exactly that means is hard to say. I mean, Guam is not, one of the 50 states, but it is a big fat target out in the Pacific Ocean that they could go after.
And that is All the more reason why there never needs to be a war between the United States and China under any circumstances. Let's hope sanity prevails there. Listen, I really appreciate you coming on today. It's got a little bit of a downer stuff, but it's critical that we understand what's at stake so that we can avoid the worst of these outcomes. And we really appreciate you pointing that out. And of course, we see you got a lot of stuff here on your Substack, your reviews of 2025 and a whole bunch of other stuff. People go to mearsheimer.substack.com to find all that you need of John in between his lovely visits here. And we will look forward to the very next one you come by. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. And once again, Happy New Year, Danny.
Same to you. We always appreciate you coming on, and we appreciate you guys too. Be sure and recognize that we are on podcast now. We're all over the place, anywhere that you need, so that you can get your unintimidated and uncompromised truths on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, and we have our own Substack. It is danieldavisdeepdive.substack.com. Of course, we're also on X. We're on Instagram. Man, we're all over the place. Make sure that you share this with your friends, folks. Let's just keep this going. Don't keep that stuff to yourself. Share it with other people so they can have access to what you have, because we all need the truth in these days. Thank you very much, folks. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You know, I don't try to talk you into buying gold or tell you how to run your stock portfolio, but there is a way you can help us. Subscribe, hit that like button, and share this with somebody you love.